Most pilots know that when we tangle with the weather usually wins. What is the root cause of these accidents? Why do the same types of accidents seem to repeat themselves no matter how many times we are warned about them? And how can we prevent these accidents from repeating themselves when we are pilot in command? Those are some of the questions we'll try to answer in this special AOPA Air Safety Institute investigation into weather accidents. If you look at media accounts of aviation accidents in which weather is a factor, you would think pilots were flying along, minding their own business, and doing a good job of flying their aircraft when weather came along and knocked the plane out of the sky. The general public may fall for that narrative, but if a pilot does, it's at his peril. What are the biggest weather-related killers? Hands down, they are accidents attributed to VFR into IMC. These accidents kill more pilots than those blamed on thunderstorms or icing combined. This is not to discount the danger of icing. Even in aircraft approved for flight into known icing conditions, ice claims its share of lives and aircraft. Thunderstorms are obviously dangerous too. The type that claims the most lives in general aviation is the embedded type. Cloudy, misty, rainy conditions create low visibility, hiding dangerous storms. The National Transportation Safety Board has targeted the issue of weather-related aviation accidents on several occasions. This includes a report issued by the NTSB titled Risk Factors Associated with Weather-Related General Aviation Accidents. A line in that report focuses on the seriousness of the issue. It reads, historically, about two-thirds of general aviation accidents that occur in instrument meteorological conditions are fatal, a rate much higher than the overall fatality rate for GA accidents. The issue of weather-related accidents is always front and center in the AOPA Air Safety Institute's Null Report. The 27th edition of the Null Report reveals weather accidents were once again the most consistently lethal. In this special series, we will go in-depth and investigate 4 actual general aviation accidents in order to examine why they happened and how to prevent them from happening again. Join us for the next video as we investigate an accident that took place in Wisconsin during the heart of winter. In our first weather accident investigation, we're going to look into an accident that claimed the life of a passenger in a Cessna 182 during a cross-country flight transitioning Wisconsin. To begin, let's get some background on the flight. It was a cold winter day when a Cessna 182 made a forced emergency landing on a snow-covered secondary road near Owen, Wisconsin. Just after landing, the left wing hit trees, spinning the aircraft out of control, doing significant damage to the aircraft and injuring the student pilot and CFI in the front seats. A passenger in the back seat was killed. What happened that led to this tragedy? To answer that question, we have to go back to that January day when the accident happened. A student pilot purchased the Cessna 182 in Indiana and wanted to relocate the plane to Fairbanks, Alaska. He obtained the help of a flight instructor to make the long cross-country flight with him. The student pilot also had a friend accompany them on the flight. Since the student pilot and CFI survived, the NTSB was able to get some insight from their perspective regarding the flight. The cross-country began at the Griffith-Merrillville Airport in Indiana, with the first stop at the Wexford County Airport in Cadillac, Michigan. The plane then departed Cadillac for another fuel stop at Menominee Regional Airport across Lake Michigan. After refueling there, the Cessna launched for the Litchfield, Minnesota Municipal Airport. It's during that third leg the accident happened. An IFR flight plan had been filed for the flight, and both the student pilot and the CFI told the NTSB they had obtained weather briefings and were aware they would encounter IFR conditions and possible icing. They both added they thought they could get above it. The 182 was at 8,000 feet, with the CFI now at the controls, when he asked Minneapolis Center for a climb to 10,000 feet, telling the controller they were picking up rime ice. Not long after reaching 10,000, the pilot asked for a descent, now telling the controller they were picking up quite a bit of rime ice. 3 minutes after reaching 8,000 feet, the pilot requested 6,000 feet. After reaching 6,000, the pilot told ATC they had a rise in temperature on the OAT, but were still picking up quite a bit of ice. They received a clearance to 4,000 feet. In just moments, ATC advised the pilot he was showing their altitude at 3,500. The pilot replied they were unable to maintain 4,000. The controller advised the pilot of weather conditions at nearby airports and asked if they wanted to deviate. The pilot replied they were looking up the weather at Eau Claire, Wisconsin. After the controller issued an altitude alert advising him the minimum IFR altitude in that area was 3,000, the pilot reported they were going to stay at 2,500, where they had visual contact with the ground and were diverting to Eau Claire. By this point, it was the controller who had declared an emergency on behalf of the pilot. Minneapolis Center lost radar contact and then lost radio communications with the 182, 41 miles east of Eau Claire, Wisconsin. In reviewing the details, this was a cross-country flight to take a plane purchased by a student pilot to his base in Alaska. To learn more, let's examine more details revealed in the NTSB report on the accident. It says the student pilot stated they knew they were going to be flying into some weather, but they were planning on staying above it. It's highly unlikely a student pilot would make that decision alone. So where would he consider that option? The answer comes from another part of the NTSB report, which reveals the CFI reported he got a weather briefing prior to the flight and knew they were going to encounter some weather, but thought they could get above it. So it was obvious during his interview with the NTSB investigators the student pilot was parroting his flight instructor. In the weather information the CFI said he had reviewed was an AirMet Zulu for moderate icing below 15,000 feet that was active in and around the accident location and in effect for the time of the accident. In addition, imagery in the forecast icing potential and current icing potential indicated high probabilities of moderate icing, including the potential for supercooled large droplets along the route of the flight and during the times of the flight affecting altitudes between 4,000 and 10,000 feet. Since both the student pilot and the CFI he secured for the flight had seen these weather reports, it brings a few questions. First, knowing these likely dangerous weather conditions would take them into known icing conditions, why even launch for the first leg of the flight? Why not reschedule? While those questions are obvious, there are other significant questions. Why continue the flight once you encounter icing conditions? Why not declare an emergency and ask for vectors from ATC for the closest airport to get the airplane safely on the ground? More information revealed in the NTSB report brings more questions. For example, when the plane launched for its first leg of the flight, the plane was 267 pounds over maximum gross weight for takeoff. In addition, what about the decision to fly over Lake Michigan in a single-engine airplane in those weather conditions? The purpose of investigating the accidents in this series and asking these questions is to examine the lessons learned to see how these accidents can be avoided in future flights. One lesson learned actually brings another question. More than any other time in aviation history, we have access to more accurate weather information more quickly and at our fingertips. Yet, this has not resulted in bringing down some weather-related accident rates. In other words, access to information does not always result in better decisions. The $6 million question is, why? Another lesson learned is the importance of in-flight decision-making. Most pilots do a reasonable job of making go, no-go decisions in obviously bad weather conditions. However, too often, that decision-making seems to deteriorate once the flag is in the air. Is it get-there-itis? A mission mentality? Likely a number of human factors are involved. Another interesting event in this accident leads us to another lesson learned. Never hesitate to declare an emergency. In this tragic accident, it was not the pilot who declared the emergency. It was the air traffic controller working with the pilot. The controller determined the pilot was in an emergency situation whether he declared it or not. Remember, if ATC declares the emergency, they do not advise you of it. They do not want to make a potentially dangerous situation worse by making the pilot nervous. Rumors that pilots get in trouble for declaring an emergency are simply not true. Controllers cannot fly the airplane for you in an emergency, but they do have many valuable tools to put to use to help you. In this particular accident, obviously ice was a serious issue. Ice and aircraft don't mix. It is dangerous even in airplanes certified for flight into known icing conditions. That equipment is not designed for continued flight in ice, but more to protect the plane until you can get out of those icing conditions. Another important reminder is it takes a long time to get rid of ice. General aviation accident reports indicate numerous times pilots thought that simply getting out of icing conditions, even temporarily, would help rid the plane of ice that had accumulated. Even if you were to escape to much warmer in-flight conditions, ice is not going to instantly melt any more than ice in an ice tray would instantly start melting the moment you removed it from a freezer. Another lesson learned in this accident is how often the chain of events reveals a lot more than what is usually blamed for the accident. In this case, it is easy to rack up this fatal accident on an icing encounter. However, there were many other decisions that were made long before the accident took place, as we revealed earlier, regarding the fact the plane was well over gross weight when it departed, and the fact it was decided to fly over Lake Michigan in a single-engine airplane in those weather conditions. After all, that is a risky flight to make in a single-engine airplane on a beautiful day. In Part 3 of the series, ASI Investigates Weather Accidents, we'll look into an accident that took place in Virginia involving thunderstorms and technology. Welcome to Part 3 in the series, ASI Investigates Weather Accidents. In this part, we'll look into an accident that claimed the life of a pilot in Western Virginia. Let's examine some details of the flight. On May 18, 2015, a Beech Baron crashed into terrain near Saltville, Virginia. The plane, with the pilot and a passenger on board, had departed Spruce Creek Airport in Daytona Beach, Florida, and was en route to Mansfield, Ohio on an IFR flight plan. There were no survivors. Shortly after noon, just 24 minutes before the crash, the pilot checked in at 9,000 feet with Tri-Cities Approach Control. The controller advised the pilot there were scattered areas of weather, 12 o'clock, about 40 miles, type and intensity unknown. The pilot replied he would like to deviate east if we could. The controller responded the pilot could deviate as necessary and remain at 9,000 feet. About 10 minutes after that interchange with ATC, the controller told the pilot to contact Indianapolis Center. The pilot acknowledged the controller. However, the pilot never contacted Indianapolis Center. Radar data showed the aircraft deviate to the east and began a gradual descent until radar contact was lost. A search located the crash site the next day in heavily wooded, mountainous terrain. Did you have an initial reaction to the video? Did you initially have an idea as to what went wrong? Unlike the first accident we investigated that took place in Wisconsin, there is very little information in the initial investigation to come to any definitive conclusions. Let's look more in depth by seeing information revealed in the NTSB investigation. Since the pilot signed into 2 weather services, the NTSB could conclude he received 2 official briefings, first from DUWATS, and then he received a briefing via text from ForeFlight Mobile. Since investigators could see what pages the pilot viewed during his DUWATS briefing, it was concluded he saw the area forecast for North Carolina and points south of there, but he did not review the area forecast for points north of North Carolina, which would have given more details of the area where the accident took place. The area forecast he did not review revealed a good chance of convective activity in the western Virginia area and points nearby. This accident takes on another twist when you learn the aircraft was equipped with an EWR-50 weather receiver capable of displaying XM Weather Service information. Could this have been a factor? It is possible when you consider many pilots have these services installed in their aircraft and are often not adequately trained on interpreting the information from the service. In fact, that issue prompted the NTSB to release a special safety alert to pilots. In that alert, the NTSB warns, weather conditions depicted on the mosaic image will always be older than the age indicated on the display. The NTSB safety alert goes on to say, in extreme latency and mosaic creation scenarios, the actual age of the oldest NEXRAD data in the mosaic can exceed the age indication in the cockpit by 15 to 20 minutes. When you consider how fast weather systems containing thunderstorms can move, 15 to 20 minutes is a long time. The first lesson learned from this accident happens to repeat a lesson and a question discussed in the Wisconsin accident we investigated. That lesson is the need to ask ourselves as pilots why, despite unprecedented access to weather information, it is not resulting in better decisions. A significant lesson to learn from this tragedy is the importance of getting the big picture when you get a weather briefing. It's not enough to look at the weather at the departure airport, the destination airport, and the weather en route. You should know what the weather trends and forecasts are for the entire region you are flying through. It's important to know where the bad weather is located and where it is going, but it's equally important to know where the good weather is in the event you have to alter your flight. Not knowing where better weather is located could result in you deviating from one area of bad weather into an area that is even worse. However, no matter how much information we receive, it's important to remember that weather details mean nothing without good decisions based on the information. Since this issue repeats itself in numerous general aviation accidents, you could prevent these problems in your own flights by asking yourself, where is the disconnect between weather information and decisions? Another lesson learned is the importance of knowing the limitations of onboard weather services. At the time of this recording, SiriusXM has improved the latency in many of its aviation products. You can compare the current services and latency times with SiriusXM products and FISB services at the web URL on the screen. When it comes to thunderstorms, always keep in mind they can move fast. Never use in-cockpit weather services as a tactical tool to navigate around thunderstorms. It should only be used for strategic planning. While latency times are improving, always remember these times can change, and always refer to the signal strength from the satellites and the timestamps when you refer to your in-cockpit display. Discussion of in-cockpit weather services also brings to the surface another lesson: the overdependence on technology. This overdependence on technology is not limited to the new digital equipment available to us. We can also become overdependent on technology that has been around quite a while, including autopilots. Consider this. We have long been taught how valuable an autopilot can be, especially in a single-pilot IFR flight. However, there have been numerous accidents blamed on loss of control despite the aircraft having an operating autopilot on board. One of the issues could be that when we suffer from vertigo induced by spatial disorientation, the feeling of falling typically accompanying vertigo could result in the pilot unintentionally moving the yoke, which automatically disconnects the autopilot, making it useless in that scenario. Another important lesson to learn from investigating this accident is the importance of knowing when it is time to change plans, ask for help, and get the aircraft to the nearest airport and on the ground. But what if weather is deteriorating fast and there is no nearby airport? This leads us to another lesson learned: the option of getting the airplane on the ground even if there's not an airport available, an off-airport landing. In recent years, aircraft insurance companies frequently restrict flight school aircraft from operating in or out of anything but airports with paved runways. If you fall into a growing category of pilots who have never taken off or landed on anything except a paved runway, this could lead to a reluctance to make a precautionary landing on a dirt road or field, even if it could be your best chance of survival. If you fall in that category, consider searching for an instructor and aircraft where you could schedule some time to get training in takeoff and landings on grass strips or other unpaved surfaces. In the next video in the series, we will investigate a weather-related accident that reveals it doesn't have to be something anywhere near as significant as thunderstorms or icing to cause us to lose control of our aircraft. Compared to the other accidents we have been investigating in this series, this one may seem rather benign. However, there is a reason it is included. While there were no injuries or fatalities in this accident, the plane was seriously damaged. It is what caused this accident that is very important to consider. Listen closely as the pilot explains what happened on the day he damaged his Piper Vagabond.
It was a nice day. Flew to Richmond and Williamstown, and then down to Oneida Lake. I decided to get fuel at Oswego Fulton Airport. On my way, I checked with AWOS. The winds were at 310 degrees. The wind speed, I'm thinking it was about 6. On my way over, I heard a pilot using runway 24. On my way over, I called in. I was 5 miles east of the airport, entering the pattern. Checked on the windsock, which was favoring 24. I called in. I was downwind for runway 24. Gave a base leg, then final for 24. My right wing was down upon landing. The crosswind changed, causing the plane to ground loop, in which I had no time to correct. Upon ground looping, when I got out of the plane, I could see the windsock was pointing right at 310, which would have favored runway 33, I believe it is. I was in a Piper Vagabond tailwheel, and it's a PA-15. Never had a problem landing this aircraft. Just before I touched the tail went around on me a little bit, just enough to get the momentum. I didn't expect it to do a ground loop at all. I checked my logbook, and prior to that, I hadn't been in the plane for 90 days. On hindsight, I probably should have landed on the turf. They have turf over there, and being I hadn't been in the plane that much, that could have been part of the problem, too.
As the late Paul Harvey used to say, here is the rest of the story. A little over an hour before Ray's accident, another pilot lost control of a Cessna 172 and ran off the runway as a result of the same reason, shifting winds. Since the winds were reportedly very manageable, almost good flying conditions, the accidents are surprising. In these cases, it wasn't necessarily the strength of the wind that contributed to the accidents. It was the fact these winds were aggressively shifting. This leads us to some lessons learned. First, we have to remember that weather, including winds, can change very quickly. It is wise aviating to always be on the lookout for even subtle changes. It is possible to detect these changes by staying updated on weather conditions during the flight. This includes utilizing any AWOS/ASOS reports along the way and at your destination airports. However, it is important to keep in mind these automated weather stations do have limitations. One is the fact the station is only able to assess the conditions where the sensors are located. They cannot look off in the distance, or even the other side of the airport, and determine different or changing conditions. In the case of Ray's accident, he did listen to a cycle of the AWOS to determine the current conditions. Based on Ray's experience, it could be wise to listen to more than one cycle of the AWOS/ASOS broadcast to see if a change had taken place. Perhaps a listen about 10 miles out, followed by another listen just prior to entering the pattern, could catch shifting winds and other changes. When it comes to dependable information on what winds are doing at the airport, it's hard to beat the trusty windsock. In Ray's accident, he did note he looked at the windsock upon entering the pattern, but then focused on landing without referring to it again. He did not notice the windsock had shifted to favoring another runway until after he had ground looped and glanced at the windsock upon exiting the plane. Another lesson learned from investigating this accident is confirmation of an old saying in aviation: to fly it all the way to the hangar. Always be expecting changes on approaching and landing. Bob Hoover made the same point when he said, you want to fly the airplane as far into the crash as possible. Is there anything that could have perhaps prevented Ray's accident? What if the pilot in the Cessna 172, after experiencing his own accident upon encountering the rapidly shifting winds, had decided to contact ATC or flight service to file a PIREP? PIREPs are very important. They provide pilots with real-life weather reports from fellow aviators who had experienced the actual conditions rather than the educated guesses of weather forecasting. The NTSB has issued a safety alert on the importance of PIREPs. You can access that alert by Googling NTSB Safety Report PIREPs. AOPA also has a program on giving good, efficient PIREPs. More on that later in this series. In the next segment, we will investigate a tragic accident that occurred in Florida that claimed the life of a CFI, who was also a naval aviator, as well as his 18-year-old cousin. As we revealed at the beginning of this series, the biggest killer in weather-related general aviation accidents falls under the category of VFR into IMC. Let's investigate a very tragic accident in Florida, in which going VFR into IMC conditions led to the loss of control of a home-built aircraft. On December 17, 2015, an experimental RV-4 crashed near Greenville, Florida. On board, a CFI, who was also a naval aviator, and a student pilot who both died in the accident. The flight originated earlier in the day from the home base of the CFI, Meridian, Mississippi. The pilot was traveling to Orlando Apopka Airport to pick up his 18-year-old cousin and bring her back to Meridian to provide her with initial flight training. After arriving in Apopka, and while refueling the RV-4, the pilot was told by a retired FAA employee that weather in his intended direction of flight was really bad. The former FAA employee later told the NTSB the pilot appeared to be in a hurry. During an earlier briefing with Flight Service, while in the air en route to Apopka, the briefer advised the pilot VFR not recommended. Ignoring the warnings from the briefer and the retired FAA employee, the pilot launched for the return trip at night with his cousin on board. The pilot became concerned about the weather and contacted FlightWatch.
FlightWatch, 777 Bravo Papa, request.
November 7 Bravo Papa, Gainesville Radio, go ahead.
77 Bravo Papa, if able, request update on weather in Tallahassee.
Do take note that you have an AirMet Tango for moderate turbulence, an AirMet Sierra for IFR conditions, and AirMet Zulu for moderate icing. Details upon request. VFR flight not recommended along that route of flight. Looks like you are about to enter into an IMC condition at the surface.
A little over an hour and a half after departing, the pilot declared an emergency with Tallahassee Approach Control. He was in IFR conditions and told ATC, quote, "I gotta be honest, sir, my airplane is not capable of IFR." 15 seconds later, the pilot made his last transmission to ATC before radar contact was lost. The wreckage was found the next morning. In examining the NTSB report from the accident, one section reads, "The low visibility conditions that existed during the flight, which was conducted at night in instrument conditions, were conducive to the development of spatial disorientation." It goes on to say, "The pilot's actions and responses, and the airplane's turning ground track and near vertical descent were consistent with the pilot losing airplane control due to spatial disorientation." While this portion of the report gives some insight into how the airplane lost control, it does not answer the question, why would an experienced pilot in CFI make this flight with his young cousin on board in those conditions at night in an aircraft not equipped for IFR flight? A possible answer to that question could be revealed in an interview the NTSB conducted with the pilot's father. The report states, "The pilot's father reported both pilots were very busy and highly driven. There was limited time for this training experience, but they made the time anyway." Let's examine some lessons learned from this fatal accident. First, heed warnings. This naval aviator and CFI had been warned about the weather in an in-flight briefing he received in his flight to Florida to pick up his cousin to bring her back to Mississippi for flight training. However, it could be argued the best briefing he received was from the retired FAA employee who spoke with him at the Apopka Airport and warned him the weather where he was heading was not good. Here was a fellow aviator with first-hand experience attempting to give him an in-person PIREP. It's also important to note that experience does not make us accident-proof. The NTSB accident database is loaded with accidents involving pilots with hundreds, and in some cases, thousands of hours in their logbooks. How many hours in your logbook does not eliminate the human factors that can lead to bad decisions. The fact is, all pilots are human and capable of suffering from conditions frequently referred to as get-there-itis or mission mentality. The answer is to police ourselves in order to be aware when we may be drifting into these mindsets. Another lesson learned is the importance of an honest self-evaluation. Evaluate your own personality to determine if you have personality traits similar to the pilot in command in this accident that could encourage you to make dangerous decisions in the quest to accomplish a goal. No goal is worth placing your life and the lives of your passengers at risk. Do you have an instrument rating? Is that an assurance that you are immune from suffering from an accident involving VFR into IMC? Here is a shocking statistic. Of accidents attributed to a pilot going VFR into IMC, 30% of those pilots had an IFR rating. Do the accidents we have investigated in this series reveal a trend? With perhaps the exception of the accident involving the shifting winds in New York, the others reveal it is not really a weather problem that is the number one killer of general aviation pilots. It is actually decisions that put the pilots into those dangerous conditions. How can you ensure you will not fall victim to the same decision-making mistakes? We will share some techniques to help you weather-wise your flights in the final installment in this series. After investigating 4 general aviation accidents in which weather was a factor, it's time to examine ways to weather-wise your flights to reduce the chance of your flight being victimized by encounters with weather. First, always immerse yourself in continuous education. There is always something to learn to make your flight safer. The AOPA Air Safety Institute website is a good place to centralize your continued education. The site is loaded with highly interactive courses to make you a better pilot. Another way to weather-wise your flight is to make sure you get big-picture weather briefings. Don't just examine the weather conditions and forecasts that are directly associated with your route of flight, but know what the conditions and forecasts are for the entire region you will be flying in. It could mean being able to get to better weather conditions quickly in the event weather deteriorates or becomes worse than forecast. One of the best ways to increase your safety as a pilot is to make a promise to yourself to never break your own personal minimums. Many pilots say they have personal minimums, but most of them say they have not written them down. Creating your own personal minimums in writing is the same as creating your own ops manual for your own flying. The AOPA Air Safety Institute website contains personal minimums contracts for both VFR and IFR operations. Download them for free. Make sure you complete your personal minimums contracts based on your current skill level and proficiency. You can make changes to the contract as your experience and training progresses. Personal minimums are the equivalent of goal setting, and everyone knows we are significantly more likely to reach our goals if we write them down. Then you must make a solid commitment to never ever deviate from those personal minimums contracts under any conditions. If you deviate from them, they become worthless. As you make decisions for each flight, be on the lookout for any scenarios where you could become infected with information bias or confirmation bias. That is a human factor where you find one specific sliver of hope buried in information that mainly contains negative conditions. You then use that one positive note to justify making a flight in questionable conditions for reasons ranging from placing too much importance on the flight to pleasing a passenger. Another way to weather-wise your flight is to always keep training. Getting with a trusted CFI during times other than a required flight review shows a dedication to being a safe, good pilot. And when you do schedule your flight reviews, make sure it is a useful opportunity for good proficiency training. Consider using the material found in the AOPA Focused Flight Review Program that contains information and checklists designed for you and your instructor to achieve a flight review with meaning. Another way to weather-wise your flight is to always know the technology on board as well as its limitations. Know what to do if that technology fails, forcing you back to basics. Never hesitate to ask for help. Rumors claiming you can get in trouble for declaring an emergency are simply not true. ATC cannot fly the airplane for you in an emergency, but they have many tools, training, and information to help you. Finally, consider being a good fellow aviator by consciously giving more PIREPs. Share the real-world weather you encounter on your flights with other pilots. It could help them make better, safer decisions. More training and tips on giving efficient PIREPs can be found in the AOPA Air Safety Institute SkySpotter program online.